Mom. What are you doing today?
Providence Place, owned by the Sisters of Providence, an ideal rental setting for retirees to continue their active, independent lifestyles. We have bright 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, a magnificent chapel with daily mass, restaurant-style dining, and wellness and entertainment programs. Call for a tour, 413-534-9700.
Mom, call me when you're not so busy.
Coming up on this edition of Reel to Reel, we mark the first anniversary of Springfield Bishop William Byrne as Shepherd of Catholics here in Western Massachusetts. A special half-hour-long interview with veteran local news reporter Ray Herschel is coming your way next on Reel to Reel. Hello and welcome to Reel to Reel. In just over a week, on December 14th, Bishop William Byrne will mark his first anniversary of being installed as the 10th Bishop of Springfield. And what a year it's been. Marked by the continuing COVID-19 healthcare crisis, a revamping of the diocesan safe environment practices, an Easter pastoral letter, the start of the Year of the Eucharist, and a worldwide synod, there is little doubt he had much on his plate. This past week, he sat down with former local news reporter Ray Herschel to answer questions on the last 12 months and his vision going forward. This was part of a live webcast, which we are showing unedited in its entirety for this special edition of Reel to Reel.
Good evening and welcome to a conversation with Bishop William Byrne. Bishop Byrne is completing his first year as head of the Springfield Catholic Diocese, having been ordained and installed as the 10th Bishop of Springfield on December 14th, 2020. I'm Ray Herschel. It's been a busy year for Springfield's new bishop. Over the next half hour, we'll cover a number of issues that directly affect Catholics in the diocese. In addition, there are some questions submitted by the public that we'll ask the bishop as well. Now, at the outset, let me mention that in agreeing to our interview, the diocese has given me freedom to ask any and all questions, and Bishop Byrne has not seen any of these questions. With that being said, so much ground to cover, let's begin with our conversation. Bishop Byrne, thanks for your time today. Appreciate your sitting down, discussing some of the issues facing the Catholic Church today.
Thank you, Ray. I'm excited to be here and to be doing this with you, to be able to talk about my experiences here in the last year.
We've got so much ground to cover here. Let's start with a letter to Catholics that you stated earlier this year that you were committed to transparency and communication in the clergy sex abuse crisis. You described that scandal as an open wound that has remained for too long. In the process, you expanded the criteria for disclosure of all those with a credible finding of sexual abuse of a minor while serving in the diocese. And as a result, in June, the list of credibly accused abusers jumped by 40, I think all the way up to 60 from 21. And on November 29th, we just learned that another name was added to that list, the late priest, Father Joseph Quinlan, the former director of Cathedral High School. With that being said, can you tell us any more on why Father Quinlan was added to that list now?
Well, the process, the list was intended to be a living document. It wasn't intended to say, oh, we have all the accusations covered. What we wanted to do is, first of all those that had been investigated and that had been found credible, which is the equivalent of a grand jury indictment. It's not to say exact guilt or innocence, but to say there is a reasonable proof to say that something might have happened. So we had the first list of names that we released, recognizing that we have ongoing accusations and that those are being delivered to the district's attorneys and they are being investigated. So it was intended all along to be a living document, and that's why sadly to see a new name added to it shows again, we want to make sure that the names are out there so that if anybody else has experienced abuse or trauma, that perhaps they would step forward. And I want to say that from the very outset. If someone is watching and they have experienced some sort of trauma or they know someone, please come forward. Call the law enforcement, report abuse at Dio Springfield. We want to heal our church.
Now, an independent task force on the response to sexual abuse came out with a number of recommendations this fall. What do you see from your vantage point as Bishop of Springfield as the most important of those recommendations, and are they being implemented right now to help survivors tell their stories in a just way?
So our primary goal, is to be a trauma-informed and trauma-responsive church, so that we aren't re-victimizing people when they come forward, which had sadly been the case in many people's experience. But I think that transparency to begin the healing process, but that it be an independent oversight, so that we have a check and balance system as we set forth this strategic plan of moving forward. We want to make sure that we are doing so, but with independent oversight that will give us a check and balance to make sure that we're moving forward in healing and finding cases, investigating them, and bringing healing to those who are victims so that they can be victim survivors.
Now, there certainly are critics and skeptics out there. The diocese has come under fire for a long time for the way it's handled these cases in the past. I want to give you a quote now from an attorney who represented some of the survivors. And he said, quote, "History has taught us that the Diocese of Springfield has been involved criminally in the wholesale sexual abuse children for decades." It comes from Mitchell Garabedian. And I'm wondering, is his statement an accurate one? And how do you convince those skeptics and those critics that you've turned over a new leaf now, that you've changed the culture in helping survivors come forward?
Right. And so, certainly there has been a failure to respond that has been clear and manifest in the past. And while I wasn't there, I can't go back and undo it. What I can do is make sure to help right the ship, to work now to make sure. That was the whole point of the task force, to set a system in place, a roadmap for the diocese to move beyond its past and to say there is a new day at hand, a new leader in the diocese, and a commitment to making sure that we right the wrongs of the past. That's the only way to heal, as you quoted me before, to wash out the wounds. And those wounds have been infected, and we want to make sure that we are doing that by being, again, trauma-informed and trauma-responsive.
Now, some of the time you spent this past year listening to survivors themselves tell you their stories of pain and abuse. And as part of this interview, we invited questions from the public who wrote in through our website. A man contacted me outside of that saying that he has a pending case against the diocese and that it's being held up. It's taking too long. He's not happy with the speed at which it's being handled. He says, and I'm quoting now, "I'm sick to my stomach that this is happening. I'm reliving this nightmare daily as long as this case continues." He goes on to say that the bishop needs to know this. "I pray that he doesn't already and that he truly wants to help me and other survivors of abuse." So, Bishop Byrne, what do you say to that individual who feels that he is still not being listened to and that his case is not being handled properly and with due speed?
Right. And so first of all, if there has been any mishandling, I can't speak to any specific cases, but to him and to any individual who has felt that there has been undue delay, I'm sorry that they've experienced that. We also have to follow a correct judicial process in any case. The handling of these, the reason why we got into much of the difficulties is decisions were being made by the bishop alone in closed doors. And I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. We follow very distinct processes along the way with outside oversight, making sure that we are being responsible. Also, the resources of this diocese are also to be used for the education of children, for the feeding of the poor, and so we have to make sure that we are handling them with a stewardship that is responsible. And so you can't always make an immediate response sometimes there is an important due process that allows us to make sure that we're not just being kind, but we're being just, that we're being loving, but also honest and true.
Now, moving forward, what is the church doing, and what did the recommendations tell you about preventing this kind of abuse from happening in the future as we look down the road?
Right, and so the Dallas Charter of the Bishops since 2002 put into place very strict guidelines. We're in the process of making sure that we are adhering to those guidelines. The cases that we're talking about are 20, 30, 40, they're decades ago. We're not necessarily speaking about new cases, because the protocols that we have with background checks, fingerprinting, and all the education that we do with our clergy, lay employees, volunteers, is part of our ongoing commitment to children now. And children now are safer than they are in any place because of these safeguards, which have been in place in the United States in the Catholic Church for 20 years.
So I guess the bottom line as we speak here tonight, your job is to change the culture. And we've seen over the past decades, that is a difficult thing to do in a diocese that has had so many cases in the past. But do you feel that you are addressing that change of culture as best and effectively as you can, given the recommendations that we're giving you?
And that's exactly my commitment. It's difficult for any one person to change a culture, but God can do it with all of us working together. And that's my deep faith and hope. But it's also the knowledge that we're doing the most state-of-the-art practices to make sure that we're following the national benchmarks to do just what we need to do, to change a culture, to communicate, and to be transparent. And I'm not hiding anything. I want to make sure that anything I know, you know. And that's why we publish the names. That's why we've updated the names. That's why we've been transparent in the whole process. That's why in the process, we went to key stakeholders with the independent task force. We went to clergy, to the public at large, to victim survivors themselves, to make sure that we heard from as many people as we possibly could in this process.
As you said at the outset, we have a number of issues we'd like to discuss with you. So moving on now from the clergy abuse crisis, another problem the church is facing is the number of Catholics who are going to church every weekend. In fact, statistics here in Western Mass indicate that only 18% of Catholics go to Mass every weekend. Bishop Byrne, how do you get Catholics to come back to church and come back to Mass?
Well, one of the principal things that we've been doing is, I've been on the road, first of all. I've almost, in my years, in my year, a little under a year, I've made every parish but 3. And so I have been there multiple times. But I also believe that we've instituted the year of the Eucharist. That one of the reasons that we should be going to Mass is to encounter Jesus, and Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. And so many Catholics never learned it or forgot it. And so this first year is a revival here in the diocese with adult education, with information processes, with prayer services, holy hours, all these elements to say, wait a second, we have the most precious, vibrant, life-giving gift, and that's Christ in the Eucharist. And if people can awaken themselves to that, then they realize maybe they should come back to experience the love of God.
I have a question here that was asked again, written in by a woman who states that I've noticed, and I'm quoting now, I've noticed a starvation in our young people for a Catholic church that has more praise, more biblical reading, and more direct teaching and knowledge given to them by faith leaders. She goes on to say that many people have been leaving to find that in non-denominational Christian churches. She cites her own daughter as an example, saying, she has so been changed by leaving our church and joining a Christian youth group that it's hard for me to deny. So our question, and her question, how do we keep our young people engaged in and excited about our faith, the Catholic faith?
So since in the last year, we've begun what's called a youth revolution. We had not had a youth ministry presence on the diocesan level previous to my arrival. After a search, we found a wonderful guy, Joe Austin, and he's one of the things, he's regionally establishing young adult groups. These young adult groups in each of the counties and parts of the counties are then in turn being engaged with the younger teens, so that we have this confirmation retreats, praise and worship opportunities, time to do adoration and to learn and to fellowship with one another, doing exactly what this lady's daughter, unfortunately she didn't find it in the Catholic Church, but she will find it in the Catholic Church as this youth revolution continues, getting our young adults engaged and having them be the mentor, role model leaders at the most local levels. So we've been doing these great confirmation retreats, which have been super successful. So we're working.
Another question came in, and this relates to church and politics, as this viewer observes. She has said, I've noticed an uptick of politics in our church and a movement of a democratic base. Even the Pope engaged with President Biden on religion and on the Eucharist. Do you believe it's okay to have a political energy in church, especially one that isn't conservative?
I think that we're here to preach the gospel. And as the gospel pertains to the culture, then we should speak out. We should defend life at all its stages, work for the poor. Here in this diocese, we've been working to bring in Afghan immigrants. To the level that our faith engages within the culture, yes, we should speak. But we shouldn't politicize our faith or our worship experience. And in that, because we're not red or we're not blue. If you look at the tenets of the Catholic Church and you compare it to our political parties, it doesn't align with either one. And so we have to stand up for truth, which is not necessarily left or right, it's truth.
Now, Bishop Byrne, if President Biden, for example, walked into St. Michael's Cathedral to attend Mass that you were celebrating, and he walked up for communion, would you give him Holy Communion based on his beliefs in pro-choice?
It's very difficult to say, just because I don't know the state of his soul or anyone's soul at that given moment. I don't know President Biden. I have met him briefly when I was a priest in Washington, but I don't know, and it would be, I think, irresponsible at that moment, not knowing somebody, not having engaged them in a personal dialogue, to have made a judgment on their soul. And if they presented themselves for communion, then I would give him communion in that moment without having been engaged. Now, is it my capacity to deny him communion or someone else? I think it's my job to inform the conscience of all believers so that they can make their decisions. But if we say, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you, but if I am doing so consciously, then that's on them. And we have to inform them of their own responsibility that they bear in relationships to God if they're presenting themselves in a sinful way for communion.
Okay. Now, while the vast majority of Catholics don't go to church every week, as we've just discussed, the church is also facing a shortage of priests. One of your priorities, of course, is to increase vocations to the priesthood. Simple, direct question, how are you going to do that?
Well, seminarians and vocations are a result of joyful priests. I think our priests have suffered a lot because of the abuse crisis, because they feel that they haven't been trusted in a way that they should be. So many of our priests, the vast majority, are hardworking, loving, spiritual fathers who every day get up and continue to anoint the sick and bring communion to those who need it, to develop communities. But I think that the more that we can increase the priests' awareness of the great gift that they have, especially through this year of the Eucharist, I know they're out there. In my parish that I just left, Ray, I had 5 seminarians from one parish. All right, when I was a chaplain at the University of Maryland, there are 14 priests from my time, those 8 years out of that. God has not stopped calling, because the priest is how he chose to bring the Eucharist. I think we stopped helping him call, and we need to build up our priests, build up the joy of our faith, and support young men in their own faith journeys.
You're looking to have that same track record, of course, here at the Springfield Diocese. A couple of related questions that have come in. One man asks why more priests aren't acquired from Poland. And he says he watches live stream masses from Poland and sees there are multiple priests on the altar all the time. A similar question from a woman who watches Holy Mass from the Vatican and says there are numerous priests, bishops, and cardinals there. Are there more priests in Europe and other countries that could help the shortage in the United States?
I would have to say that Poland certainly would be an example of a European country, but it's a rare example in the European faith experience. Many more vocations are coming out of Africa and Asia. It's my hope that we would engender and bring and call forth men from our diocese, people that are from this place, that know what it's like to be from Western Massachusetts, and somebody who understands the Berkshires and the beauty of Franklin County and the Hampden County, the excitement down here. So I'm open to men if they're being called to this diocese, but I really am first and foremost looking to engender vocations from here. As for Polish, we still offer Polish, within 10 minutes from here on any given Sunday from the cathedral. At 10 minutes I can hit 3 different parishes that are all offering Polish masses. So you can go to Mass in Polish if you want to around here.
That is true. Western Massachusetts, that is true. You talked a little bit, just briefly, about the Year of the Eucharist, which just began. Now, as we know, the Eucharist, of course, is the central theme of our Catholic faith, and that we believe that at Mass, the Eucharist is transformed into Christ's body and blood. But many of the faithful actually doubt that. In fact, a Pew Research group indicated that only 30% of Catholics believe that transformation to be true. The other 70% believe the bread and wine are symbolic. Why do you feel Catholics feel this way, and are you concerned at all about those statistics?
Absolutely. That's why we're doing a Year of the Eucharist, a revival here for people to understand. God's word is actual, it's effective, not descriptive. When Jesus says, "This is my body," he's not giving a description, he's actually making it happen. It's effective. And so it is that if I went to you and I said, "Hey Ray, I'm hungry," and you said, "Okay, great, Bishop, here's a picture of a sandwich," that wouldn't make me full. You see, God is not going to feed us with symbols. He's going to feed us with his very life within us. And that people have not heard that people are not strengthened by it, that people have forgotten it, is on us. And it's not just me, Ray, it's every Catholic that receives the Eucharist must be missionaries of that Eucharist, to let people know this is the most sublime gift that he gave right before he died.
And, we've got a few minutes left, and I want to get a few more questions in, but one thing I wanted you to comment quickly on, I was reading where you had a life-changing experience, speaking of the Eucharist, in viewing the Eucharist as a young man, in your 20s, I believe. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, had a profound effect on your coming closer to God and eventually entering the priesthood. Can you just share that story?
I can. I was traveling with some members of my family. We were actually in Europe, and we said, let's just meet in this church while we were traveling along. I got there first, and I sat down. It was cool on a hot day in the dark church, and then the Eucharist was there, displayed in the monstrance, that gold cross on the altar, and all of a sudden I was filled with this sense that Jesus was really there. And that same sense has been with me throughout my experience, and I found out that Christ is in the Mass, not just in a symbolic way, but in a real way, and that's God.
A truly life-changing experience.
It was
at that very time for you. Also wanted to cover the synod that Pope Francis is calling for worldwide. He wants the church to listen to all who are baptized. Now, on October 17th, you launched a local synod with a special liturgy here in Springfield. What is the goal of the local synod, and how does that tie in to Pope Francis' call for all Catholics to be involved?
So the Pope wanted the whole synodal process to start as on the most local level. Parishes having conversations, dioceses having conversation, those conversations being sent in eventually to the national and then continental and then into the Vatican. And the Pope was saying, basically, the word synod means a meeting on the way, synod from the Greek. And that's what we're trying to do, is just be a listening church. And the synodal process, this synod, this word, this meeting, this listening, is just to help train us, to educate us to listen to each other and to how the Holy Spirit works among us. It makes perfect sense to me because I've always said in all my pastoral ministry that the Holy Spirit doesn't just talk to me. That's why I love this idea of the questions at diospringfield.org, that where you're receiving many of these, and hopefully we'll do this again. And we're going to keep that open, Ray, for people to be able to ask questions so that we can discuss them or in whatever form, but so that I can be a listening bishop, we can be a listening church.
Of course, you're very well known. You've been involved with YouTube. You've written a book called 5 Things, and I don't know if we'll have time to get to that today or not, but been very active with social media and television. We have another question who came in who says, in coming from such a strong mass communications background yourself, including the 5 Things with Father Bill Feature, what is your impression of leading a diocese with such a strong communication department? And how has that become an essential tool for evangelization, for sharing and spreading the Word of God?
Well, it's a remarkable thing because in the past, people would watch the news, they would read the newspaper. But now when I had seminarians live with me during the pandemic, they were all staring at their phones. And it's like, okay, well, these 28-year-olds are all getting their information in new ways. And so if we want to, Paul decided to let people know about Jesus by writing letters. That was a great way of communicating. We still have them, all of them, Corinthians. And what we now have is a new way of writing letters through YouTube, through videos, through Instagram, through these conversations. So it's very exciting.
And I forgot to mention you're an author as well.
Yes, I am.
5 Things with Father Bill. Some great inspiration
Thank
here.
you.
Bishop Byrne, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Ray, thank you.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time at this point. I want to thank Bishop Byrne for his time and just sitting down and discussing his first year as Bishop of the Springfield Diocese, all the challenges he's faced and his accomplishments over this first eventful year. For all of you who have joined us and for those who submitted questions, thank you for your interest and participation. By the way, the diocese will be keeping the email address used for tonight open for more questions in the future. That email address is questions@diospringfield.org. I'm Ray Herschel, and have a good evening.
Our thanks to Ray Herschel and Bishop Byrne for this forthright discussion, and you can watch this interview anytime on our YouTube channel. You can find a link for that at iobserve.org. And for this week, that's Real to Real. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to follow the latest news of the Catholic Church both here in the Diocese of Springfield and around the world on our news and information site, iobserve.org. We update stories daily, and you can also find on-demand episodes of Real to Real and Chalice of Salvation. So stay in touch by visiting iobserve.org. And join us again next week at this same time for a new edition of Real to Real, your window on the world around you. Until then, have a great week.
Real to Real is a production of the Catholic Communications Corporation, funded in part by the annual Catholic Appeal, and the support of you, our faithful viewers.